how badly central planning works when the Soviet Union collapsed. Nevertheless, the arguments between Lange and Lerner and Hayek and von Mises was a very interesting one intellectually, and Hurwicz was very interested in the question of whether, in the cases where there are market failures, are there mechanisms which can do better than the market? Or are there cases where there are mechanisms which can economize on information? I mean, the markets, as Hayek and von Mises pointed out, does economize on information, because I as a buyer and you as a seller don't have to know what everybody else's preferences are. That's very economical. But perhaps, Hurwicz asked, there are mechanisms which are even better. And so he thought of mechanism design as a general way of analyzing mechanisms, including the classical mechanisms like the market mechanism. Well, that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I hope it suggests that this field didn't just come out of nowhere. It was directly inspired by an important intellectual debate about a classical mechanism, the market.
Gracias.
Aquí adelante tienen una pregunta.
It certainly is an honor to have you here, Dr. Maskin. And you mentioned two potential applications for this mechanism. I was wondering, I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with Mexico's current situation, but if you could give us a few examples of this model for Mexico as a third world country that is trying to get out of this very deep economic crisis with problems such as poverty and, well, you know, all these problems.
Yeah. Actually, one particular question that I have been working on myself in collaboration with Michael Kramer, who's an economist at Harvard, is why is it the case that in many developing countries around the world, globalization, which has increased average incomes in many developing countries, has at the same time caused a greater gap between rich and poor. It tends to be people at the upper end of the income scale who have gained the most from globalization, and people down at the bottom have tended to be left behind, or actually even made worse off as a result of globalization. So that's an important theoretical question. Why has this happened? And we have an answer, which I'm not going to go into today because it would be a separate talk. But we have an answer to that puzzle. But we also have a mechanism design issue, which is, well, accepting that this has happened, is there anything we can do about it? So what kinds of mechanisms could we put in place which would help correct for the increasing inequality? And the particular mechanism that we have in mind is training. That is, in our theory, the reason for this increasing gap between rich and poor is that that people down at the bottom don't have any useful skills to sell in the global marketplace. And the answer to that difficulty is to create a mechanism whereby they would get those skills. Now, how do you do that? Well, the problem is that these workers can't acquire the skills on their own. They're too poor. They can't afford the training that it would take. Private companies don't always have the incentive to train these workers, because if you train me so that I now have more skills, I don't necessarily have to work for you. I could go work for your competitor, and then your investment in me will have been lost. So a clever mechanism, or a mechanism which gets around this problem, is an incentive scheme that the government gives companies. It's in effect a subsidy scheme whereby it gives companies a bit of money for, in return, training workers to have skills which will be useful on the global marketplace. That's a mechanism design question which could possibly even be relevant here in Mexico.
Una última pregunta.
Bueno. Well, yeah, it is a pleasure to have you here, Doctor. And a question goes about the Nobel Prize. Personally, did it take you by surprise? Was it something that you guys thought, well, we're going for the Nobel, and in your case, once you received it, what do you think it takes to win such a prize? And what is the responsibilities? What are some of the responsibilities that go with it?
Okay. First of all, it was a surprise. It was a surprise in the following sense. There are lots of people out there who have done superb work in economics. All of them are deserving of recognition. I'm glad that it turned out that our work was deserving of recognition too, but it was more, I think it was more or less a lottery that we happened to win. And I'm not complaining about winning, but I certainly didn't count on it. And in fact, it's my view that as an incentive scheme, the Nobel Prize is not actually very good. And the reason why it's not very good is that if you rationally calculate your chance of winning, it's pretty small. It should not change your behavior very much to know that there's a minuscule chance that you might win some prize. Furthermore, even if you did have a good chance of winning, I'm not sure that it would change your incentives in the right way, because if you're trying to win a prize, what your thinking gets distorted. What you're trying to do is to figure out what somebody else is going to think is important, rather than working on what you think is important. But in fact, the whole reason for going into academic research in the first place, I mean, certainly it doesn't pay very well. The main reason for doing it is because it gives you freedom. It gives you the freedom to work on exactly what you think is interesting, and never mind what other people think is interesting. So I don't think prizes provide a very good incentive scheme for basic research. Nevertheless, I do think that they serve a useful social purpose, not for the